And now it's Little Italy Podcast and the Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for tuning in today for Deborah Kobylt Live and our Little Italy Podcast. Boy, am I excited to introduce my guest, Gary Vitti, longtime Lakers head athletic trainer. He wrote this book, 32 Years of Titles and Tears from the Best Seat in the House. We've got an awful lot to talk to you about, Gary. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Deborah.
Yeah, just so excited. Okay, Gary, let's start, if you don't mind, because I always say we learn a lot about a person where they're at now by going back quite a bit, like to who they were as kids. You are of Italian descent. Tell me a little bit about where you were born and, I don't know, what was life like growing up as a kid for you, Gary?
Well, I'm a first generation Italian American. My dad was born in a small village, probably about 90 minutes from Rome, up in the mountains, peasant village. He was born in 1921. He actually passed away in 2018, so he was 97 when he passed. And you know, at I guess 14 years old, around 1935, he was being conscripted into Mussolini's avant-gardista, which was, you know, the Italian version of the Hitler Youth. And in those days, there wasn't any work. You know, it was a massive depression in all of Europe, and especially Italy. And so my grandfather came to America, to New York, and then one by one started bringing my father's siblings over, his older sisters. He was the youngest, and you know, they all worked in a sweatshop. My grandfather was a laborer. My dad explained to me that people that came from this particular village, their dream was to be an opera singer, but nobody really achieved that dream. That would be sort of like me growing up and dreaming to be a professional athlete, right? You know, you want it as a kid, and you think you can do it, but nobody ever really does. And we grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, about 40 miles from the center of Manhattan. So Dad moved us out of New York and into Connecticut. And my life was sort of like, when I walked out the door, I walked into America. But when I got home and walked in the front door of our house, I stepped back into Italy. And we grew up with really old school Italian morals, values, and ethics. And I'm very thankful for that today. But it probably, you know, looking back as a child, it wasn't easy all the time, because the other kids were just like regular American kids, and we didn't have, you know, that sort of upbringing.
Yeah, but you probably had the best lunch at school, right? Because I always had like the meatball sandwiches and all these great lunches I'd be unwrapping, and everybody had like a jelly sandwich on Wonder Bread. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So am I right about that?
Absolutely right. I actually wanted a peanut butter and jelly
Me
sandwich
too.
for lunch. My mother wouldn't give it to me, you know.
No, my mother would neither. She'd say, they don't care, but I care. So she'd be up at like 4 a.m. making my sandwiches, my tuna, whatever. Hysterical to have those memories. Gary, I think it's on page 50 of your book. You said you were the Italian-American kid with a failed sports career, but you found yourself amid sports greatness. The rest is a 32-year history of working side by side with Hall of Famers, and the rest is history. Tell me, what were you like as a kid in sports? I guess you said it right there. And then let's jump a little bit to you were working at a university and you got the call from the Lakers. So let's talk a little bit about your very early sports career and then jump to college.
Okay. So, you know, where we grew up, Stamford, Connecticut is a real sports town. We actually had a lot of sports figures that lived there. Jackie Robinson actually retired in Stamford, Connecticut. Some of the old school New York Giants fans will remember Andy Robustelli, who was captain of the New York Giants and all-pro defensive end. He lived there. I grew up with all of his children. We all went to the same parochial school. Bobby Valentine, very famous baseball player and baseball manager. He was like my sister's age. Both of my sisters are 6 and 7 years older than me. So, you know, I grew up in this really great sports town, and as a child, I was actually pretty good. I mean, you know, playing Pop Warner and Little League and Tiny League and Babe Ruth. But then by the time I got to high school, the talent level just really soared. The size of the kids were a lot bigger and stronger than me, and so I was too small to play football. I was the last cut on the baseball team, but I made the freshman JV basketball team, and I'm not exactly sure. I described this incident in the book. I'm not exactly sure what happened between this particular coach, and he happened to be Italian, by the way, and myself, but we really didn't like each other. And he tried to run me off the team, and I wanted to quit, but I refused to. I said, let me finish the season because I'm not a quitter. I went to graduate school, and a lot of stars lined up for me. So in 1979, I was living in New York City. I moved from Manhattan to Salt Lake City, Utah. There were very few athletic training programs in the country. The University of Utah had a great program. It was a little circuitous, but I got into that program. I actually went there for a meteorology degree, but then matriculated into the sports medicine program. Well, 79 on the campus of University of Utah is the same year that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird played each other for the NCAA championship on the campus of the University of Utah. Same year that the New Orleans Jazz moved to Utah and became the Utah Jazz. Same year that Gary Vitti moved from New York to Salt Lake City and entered the sports medicine program. Finished my master's degree, started my PhD. Word got around. There weren't a lot of PhDs in athletic training in those days. Now there's a ton. Word got around about me through pro sports because the Utah Jazz were there, and I was doing some part-time work for them. And I was offered a position at the University of Portland as the head athletic trainer and an adjunct assistant professor. Took that job, was there for a couple of years. The Lakers had just won 2 championships, and they were looking to modernize their sports medicine area. And Jerry West called me and says, your name's been floating around, and we'd like to talk to you. Well, Jerry West, I mean, that's like my boyhood idol, right? I was a New York Knicks fan, but I also loved the Lakers because it was West Coast, it was cool, and as long as they weren't playing the Knicks, I was rooting for the Lakers and Jerry West, right? And so, believe it or not, his secretary calls me after I spoke to him and said, we're sending you a first-class ticket. I had never flown first class before. I should tell you this, that I was still working on my PhD now at Utah in absentia, and really all I wanted to do was be a college professor in sports medicine. I'd already had a little taste of the NBA with the Jazz, and it was not a goal of mine to go into professional sports. But, Jerry West calls you, the Lakers call you, you pick up the phone. Yeah. And then his secretary says, we're sending you a first-class ticket. I never flew first class before, so that was pretty cool. And then she tells me Jerry West is going to pick you up at the airport. So really? She goes, yeah, he'll be in a navy blue Mercedes with tan interior. I had never been in a Mercedes before. She went on to say, well, he's 6'4", and that's when I interrupted her and said, I know what he looks like. And lo and behold, I walk out of LAX, and there's Jerry West curbside, leaning against a navy blue Mercedes with tan interior. I get in the front seat, and we drive down Century Boulevard to the great, fabulous Forum at the time, and I'm sitting in the car with Jerry West. I don't know how else that should be kind of self-explanatory what that feeling would be like for a 30-year-old kid still, right? And we go to the Forum, and it's 1984 now, right? So it just happens that it's the 84 Olympics. And the day that I'm interviewing with Jerry West and Pat Riley, 2 of the biggest names in professional basketball, is the same day that USA Basketball is playing Spain for the gold medal in the 84 Olympics. Wow. So it's just an electric area. And I just go from not being interested so much, but wanting to hear what it was all about, to all of a sudden being really interested.
Jerry, no, wait, I just called you Jerry. What am I saying? Hang on a minute. Gary. What did they ask you? Do you remember one of the questions? Were you nervous when you were answering these questions? Because that's like a pivotal point for anybody, right? For anybody young who's listening to this story who goes, how did he handle this? Probably nervous, probably couldn't even believe he was talking to these great people. Do you remember what they asked you? Do you remember what you answered?
Sure. And the answer about being nervous, first, I'll tell you this. I was so confident in my abilities, and not to knock anybody, but I felt that they were so backward in sports medicine. And let's talk about that for a second. So,
sure.
Sports medicine, let's say this, that there's been trainers around since the gladiators, but sports medicine as a discipline is probably only about 50 years old. And so for me, we're talking about 40 years ago. So it was only 10 years in. And today, it's much more evidence-based than it was 40 years ago. But as it was changing and becoming more modernized, I was at the forefront and the cutting edge of that. And so that I saw myself as a valuable asset. And I was not intimidated going into the interview. You might be the Los Angeles Lakers and the greatest in basketball, but I'm Gary Vitti and I'm really good at what I do. And so I've earned the chance to be sitting in front of you and discuss this. And so the conversation was more like, well, how would you do this? How would you do this? How would you handle a player if you wanted him to do this and he told you, no, I'm not doing it? Those sorts of things. And also, what is your philosophy? What was your philosophy about nutrition? What was your philosophy about flexibility? What was your philosophy about strength training? Because strength training really didn't exist in the NBA at the time, and I was a real proponent of it. And Pat Riley was very, very progressive. And so he really wanted to hear my feelings about that, which I described somewhat in the book. And so I really kind of felt like I earned the right to be there. So I really wasn't nervous. I was very candid with them, and I said, listen, I'm not sure that this is what I want to do. I mean, the only reason why I'm here is because you're the Lakers, you know?
Right.
And I said, I see my future in front of a classroom, in a performance laboratory, doing research, and taking the information that I'm learning and then extolling it out to the athletic population. And Pat Riley said probably the most important words in that interview. And he said, well, you could do what you want to do here, but you can do it with the greatest athletes in the world. And that kind of was like let a light bulb off in my head.
You know, I've interviewed a few folks from the Lakers, Jeannie Buss, Byron Scott, to name a few. And I just started watching this docudrama, right, on HBO.
At some point, they called me and said, listen, we're not going to have your character in the show. There's not going to be a Gary Vitti in the show, but we want you in the show. And I go, well, I don't get it. And apparently in Hollywood, there's something that's called an Easter egg. And I was an Easter egg, meaning they dressed me up like a scout. I had an afro and sideburns and a polyester outfit. And they made me look like a scout. And I was in the war room with Bill Sharman and, you know, the guy that was playing Bill Sharman, Brett Cullen, and Jason Clark's playing Jerry West and all these other people. And the idea of this Easter egg is that if you're a real Laker fan, you're watching this and then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, is that Gary Vitti? Yeah, so that's an Easter egg.
I love it.
Okay.
I
was
love
an
that.
Easter egg. But I had no idea. I hadn't seen the script or anything like that. And very early on in the shooting, I realized that they were mischaracterizing Jerry West. I mean, they really make him look like a drunken lunatic. And I've known Jerry now for 38 years. Yeah. And I've never seen the man drunk. I've never seen him curse at anybody the way they've portrayed him to be. And so after the first day of shooting, so my contract read that it'd be a minimum of 2 days. I have a SAG card, so they had to pay me scale. It'd be a minimum of 2 days and possibly 3. So after the first day, I called Rick Fox and I said, Foxy, these guys got Jerry all wrong. I said, this isn't good. And he said, well, let me talk to him. So he went and spoke to them, and then they came back to me on day 2 of the shooting, and they said, listen, we understand what you're talking about, but you need to understand this is not a documentary. It's fiction. And I said, yeah, but like people that don't know the guy are going to think it's real, you know? And so we shot the second day, and it was more of the same. And they called me and said, we want to option the third day, and we want to offer you 2 more for a total of 5 days. And I said, listen, you know, I signed up for 2 and I possibly 3. Okay, so I'll do the third day because I signed up for it, but I want you to know that I really don't want to do it. I don't feel comfortable with this, and I'm definitely not doing the other 2. And they asked me why, and I told them because of Jerry West, the mischaracterization. I don't want to be a part of it. And it wasn't acrimonious in any way. I mean, they said, we understand, okay?
Yeah.
And they let me go, okay? And so I left, truth be told, I left about $15,000 on the table, which, as a retired guy on a pension, you can always, I mean, it's not going to change your life, but 15 grand is still 15 grand. And so, you know, I walked off the set.
The job of a head athletic trainer, particularly for the Los Angeles Lakers, what do? You're pretty much intimately involved with these players, right? I mean, it said in your book that one of their kids gets sick. They call you before they call the pediatrician, for example, right? I mean, you know these people intimately. Tell me what the job entails. It's probably so much.
Oh. So the bottom line is that you are in charge of the health care and well-being of the players, okay? It kind of extends further than that to the coaches and almost everybody in the organization. You know, we have team physicians of all different specialties, but you know, they're there for games, and you know, and then if you need to send them in, you know, have a place to send them to, you know, a sports medicine clinic. But the guy that's with them all the time was me. And you commented about the pediatrician. I would say, what are you calling me for at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why didn't you call the pediatrician? And the answer was always because I knew they wouldn't pick up the phone, and I knew you would. Okay, and so you travel with them, you basically live with them, you see them more than you see your own family, and you know, it's hard to describe all the things that come under that sports medicine umbrella. I mean, the easy stuff is, like I said, the health and well-being, the conditioning, the strength training, the nutrition, the flexibility, even the sports psychology. But it kind of goes a little bit deeper than that. You have to develop a trust with these players. You know, some players want you to know everything. Some players don't want you to know anything. You know, we're having more and more publicity about mental health in sports. You know, I had bipolar players. I had guys that didn't want me to know that they had mental issues. Of course, you know, because they're crazy, you know. You have other guys that would want you to carry their medication, but they didn't want anybody else to know because they felt that their mental issues may be used against them during contract time. So it's a very fine line that you're walking all the time, and you're trying to build trust with the athlete, and at the same time, you know, you need to be trusted by management. This sounds really harsh, but it's the truth, is that the athlete is actually viewed as an asset. You know, he's an investment.
Of course.
By the owner. I mean, and some of the guys make so much money as an asset to the owner that you have to take a life insurance policy out on them in case something happens to them. Right.
And like for example with Magic Johnson, right? I mean, that is how they found out
That's
that he was
correct.
HIV positive, right? Because
That,
of the life insurance doctor who had to draw the blood on him. Isn't that
that's
correct?
correct. That's correct. So we did our physical exam, but our physical exam didn't have an HIV screening. You couldn't do an HIV unless they asked you. Say, hey, listen, test
Right.
me for HIV. But none of them were going to do that. We couldn't do it because it would be a violation of the civil liberties.
Mm.
But when you take out a life insurance policy, that's a whole different ball game, and that's how it showed up, and that's how we found out because he had passed his physical exam. We thought he was 100% healthy. You know, the fact of the matter was he was HIV positive, but he was very, very, very close to full-blown AIDS at the time. So
Wow.
if they didn't find out, his white count might have gone low enough. He was right around a little over 200, and that seemed to be the line where below that you're AIDS positive, and above that you're just HIV positive. Okay, he was right there, and luckily they found it and got him on at the time the medication that was available. And look at him today; he's going to outlive us all. But we were very, very close, and we actually thought it was going to be a death sentence at the time.
I mean, what always amazes me are the personalities that you have to deal with. You're intimate with these people. You know their bodies. You know their families. But how do you do that?
The title of the book is 32 Years of Titles and Tears from the Best Seat in the House. And that really is hopefully what happens when you read the book is that it'll make you laugh and it'll also make you cry in certain places. And the subtitle is what I learned about happiness, greatness, and leadership. And the book isn't about me. The book is about the lessons that I learned, and now I'm telling you those stories about those lessons. You know, when you see Kobe in pain, you know it hurts. Okay, because you can have a minor dislocation, it doesn't hurt that much. But this one, you could tell he was really hurt. And but as soon as I put it back in, you know, I kind of patted him on the back of the head and I said, "You're okay." And he just went right back out there. He didn't even give me a chance. I wanted to tape it up before I do it. He was gone. He was right back in the game, and it's a testament to the intestinal fortitude that kid had. Hands down, he was the toughest player that I had ever worked with, and I had a lot of tough guys, but he was on a different wavelength. That wasn't
You were
even
very,
that wasn't
you were,
Kobe. That was the Black Mamba. There's two different people there, two completely different personalities. The Black Mamba was this ruthless, vicious competitor. And then Kobe Bryant was this really, really sweet kid that if you saw him with my daughters, his daughters, my goddaughter, a Make-A-Wish kid. If you saw him with a Make-A-Wish kid, your heart would melt. Kobe Bryant was a wonderful human being, and I miss him.
we all miss him. But I can't imagine working with someone so intimately all these years. Tell us about him. Tell me something about him that a lot of people might not know.
So what was there about him that he ended up with 5 rings and other guys that were more talented ended up with none? And you know, I spent my career with him. 20 years I was with the guy trying to analyze that. And what I kind of came up with, and this is the Black Mamba we're talking about, because there's 2 completely different people that I knew, okay,
Right.
that lived at the same address, and they both
Right.
showed up in the uniform, just depending on who you were talking to at the time. So this guy, the Black Mamba, he worked harder than anybody that I've ever been around, but I've been around a lot of hard workers. So besides being the hardest worker, he was really, really smart. He was an intelligent worker, and he taught me that. Losing for him really hurt. A lot of people, it doesn't hurt as much, but for him it did. But what was great about him, this is really important, is when he did lose, he came back stronger. He learned from his loss. He looked within and said, what did I do wrong? What can I do better? Okay? How could I have changed that outcome? And so I realized that in life, we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. A lot of times our successes are associated with luck. Okay? You throw up a last second shot and it goes in, you win. If it bounces off the rim, you lose. If you win, you go in the locker room, everybody's happy. But you don't talk about, well, how did it come down to the last shot? We could have lost that game. And then you analyze everything you did wrong. But you don't really do that. You celebrate the win. But if we lost, it's a difference between this, celebrating and then analyzing. Okay? So he was that kind of guy. He was intellectually brilliant at his job and in life. Anything that he did, he just didn't fly by the seat of his pants. He researched it. He studied it. We'd come in at halftime in the modern day of the NBA, because I came in before cell phones and all that. But we would come in and players would go to their lockers and grab their cell phones and look at their text messages and their tweets and their emails. He didn't do that. He was in my room. He was in the training room trying to get something to feel better that hurt. But more importantly, he had one of the scouts put a laptop and he'd showing him clips of the first half. So he could study what happened in the first half so he could come out better in the second half. He was tougher than anybody that I work with because he convinced himself that he could do it. Somehow he convinced himself, whatever it was. He took the words can't and won't out of his lexicon and replaced those with can and will. And I realized that all of us, everybody, is capable of extraordinary things. What holds us back is this.
Yeah.
And he was able to rise above his level of talent to become the best at what he did. And that means anybody can really do it. Okay? It's all up in your heart, your soul, your brain, convincing yourself. You know, take can't out of your lexicon. Take won't out of it. And find a way to do it.
Did you often have to come in between players when you knew that stuff wasn't quite working out? Shaq, Kobe, Kareem, Magic. You know, there were so many different dynamics going on. How did you get involved?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably more between players and coaches, okay, than player and player. But Shaq and Kobe, I mean, that was an issue. That was an issue, and I believe, and I write this in the book, that it's really easy to blame Shaq and Kobe for our implosion because that team was so good. We should have been on top for 10 years. It should have been a decade of winning.
Right.
And we self-imploded in a matter of 4 years. And it's really easy to blame Shaq, and it's easy to blame Kobe. And, of course, you know, they were a part of it. But what about the rest of us? Okay, we allowed it to happen. You know, and that includes me. The game is mental, okay? So, you know, everybody that's in the NBA is talented. You know, you wouldn't have gotten there. When I started in the league, there was only 23 teams, and we only had 12 players on the team. So if you do the math, we roughly had, 276 players. You might have signed some guys on a 10-day contract or whatever. Now the rosters are 15 players on each team, and there's 30 teams. So you got 450 players in the NBA, and you got some in the G League and other players around the globe. So if you're the 451st talented player in the world, you're not good enough to play in the NBA. That's how competitive it is. So everybody there is pretty good. So what makes the difference between you winning and losing? Well, it's a mentality for sure, But part of that mentality is everybody has to be on the same page, okay? Which means you have to buy into whatever the coach is selling. Okay, so number one, you have to look at what your personnel is. You have to know your personnel. So one of the things I describe in the book is that a team is like a puzzle. There's a finite number of pieces in the puzzle. If you look at a jigsaw puzzle, if you're missing a piece, if the entire puzzle's put together but you're missing one piece, then the puzzle's not complete. There's also not any extra pieces. So all the puzzles have to fit. So you look at your team and you have to find out where you fit in the puzzle. I will go down in history, unless they change the rule, to have the two youngest players in the history of the game. We got Kobe Bryant at 17, and then we got Andrew at an even younger 17. Now they changed the rule. You can't come into the game until you're 19 years old. And they may change that rule someday. But right now, I had the two young. You know, if I wanted to give Kobe Advil, I had to call his mother. He was a minor, and he was traveling with us, okay? You know, by the time I finished my career, I was so much older than everybody, and I had so many more years of experience. And also, times changed, society changed. You know, I believe that the NBA is nothing more than a microcosm of society. So whatever's going on out there in society, that's pretty much what's going on in our locker room. The year Kobe retired in 2016, we were the second most valuable basketball franchise in the NBA behind the New York Knicks. The Knicks were the most valuable because they own MSG Network. Okay?
Right.
But we were the most valuable. So we were a losing team, a non-playoff team, but we were more profitable than any other team in the NBA, and that was because of Kobe. And so the whole idea was to put Kobe on the floor and let him do whatever he wanted to do and put on a show.
Wow.
So, and here's what would happen. Every time he got the ball, he would shoot it. And I would tell him, I said, you know, I don't get it, okay? You will take 10 horrible shots in a row, miss every shot, put the team 15, 20 points in a hole in the first quarter, and you will take the 11th shot, equally bad shot, off balance with two guys on you, and it'll go in, and you'll get a standing ovation. And he'd smile and go, I know, and I'm going to do it tonight. Only thing is, he took a lot of shots that night, but a lot of them went in. He scored 60 points. Okay? And at the end of it, he came straight to me off the floor and gave me a big hug, said, I told you so. And that was it. We went out together. We retired together. That was our last game. And I think neither of us knew what to expect, but I think we both knew that it was time. It was time to move on to the next phase of our life. And this is the tragedy. And I'm going to try to do this. See, we don't know what we lost. We have no idea. Okay? Because he was capable of great things off the basketball court. I mean, the guy won an Oscar off the bat. We have no idea what we lost, okay, other than we just, and it's hard. It's, you know, I live
Gary,
in Manhattan Beach. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I live in Manhattan Beach, and I've been here for 38 years, and I have had helicopters flying over my house for 38 years. And I always thought it was kind of cool. You know, you look up and see what color it is, what direction are they going. You wonder who's in there. But that's not what I think about now, and that's every single day. You know, I see it, and I just think of Kobe and what we're missing and what he was going to do for women in sports, you know, because we were both girl dads. In June of this year, 2022, that'll be the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And Title IX opened up a lot of doors for women. Probably not enough, but at least it was a start. And primarily, it appears to me now, looking and researching it, that the primary objective of Title IX was to give female athletes better facilities. But as I see it back then, the athletic departments really still didn't really care about
Right.
the women, the female athletes. They were mostly non-revenue sports, and it was something that they were forced to do by the government. And so they gave them better facilities, but that was about it. So now you have these women that are training better, and they have better facilities, but there's nobody there to take care of them because the male athletic trainers are all tied up with the male athletes. The female trainers are trying to get into the training room, and they're saying females aren't allowed. And so
Right.
finally it occurred to these universities that we have to give them an athletic training space, and then we have to have a female take care of them, okay? Because the males couldn't and wouldn't. And so, kudos to some male athletic trainers that saw that and gave opportunities to female athletic trainers, mostly out of necessity, okay? But they were willing to do it. And so who were these women that broke the glass ceiling? Well, I came to find out they were mostly physical therapists that were former athletes, and then they decided to take care of female athletes and kind of filtered into male sports after that. But there's some real horror stories of football coaches kicking them off of the sideline because they were female. Long story short, I have 5 women that I co-wrote their memoirs with, and we just acknowledged them at a district meeting in San Diego, and presented them with awards from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were one of the first to hire a woman, San Francisco 49ers. I had one woman that was, she was an athletic trainer. She also did 20 years in the Navy as a corpsman. And so I had a friend from the U.S. Naval Hospital in San Diego show up in his dress blues and award her a letter from one of the commanders of the Navy. And so it was really just a wonderful thing. I had one woman, and I really want to tell this because this is, to me, horrific. She had a football coach, and this was not that long ago, just a few years ago, that would not allow her or her female student athletic trainers to go to the bathroom in the field house, the co-ed field house. So if she was on the sideline, he made her and her female students walk all the way around the football stadium and go to the public bathroom on the visitor's side. That's a horrific thing. And that happened in this day and age, after Title IX. And so she's a woman that,
Wow.
that I helped write her memoir. And, we're making progress. We're not nearly where we should be, but we're going in the right direction slowly. And we lost Kobe, who was really committed. He was really committed to this. And, we're going in the right direction, but we would have gone further and faster with Kobe behind us. And I'm hoping that somebody will step up and follow in his footsteps. He had all daughters. I had daughters. We were committed to female athletes. So maybe somebody watching this someday, if you're not, if it's not you, maybe it's somebody pass the baton, and let's get behind this. John Wooden would say, don't on any given day that you're not 100%, don't think about what you can't do. Think about what you can do. Tell me what you can do today and do that. Do it the best you can. So there's lots of little things in the book, okay, that I think will help you along. And they're not necessarily, Gary Vitti-isms, okay? Like I said, they're lessons that I learned from other people. You know, I'm not the smartest guy out there. I'm not a legend. I'm not the most talented, but I worked with a lot of legends and I worked with a lot of smart people and I kept my eyes and my ears and my brain open. Okay? And I've probably forgotten more than I remember. Okay? But what I did remember, I tried to write it down so I could pass it on. You know, I mean, I didn't write the book for me. I wrote it for especially young people.
Gary, this is one of the best books that I've ever read. And I don't say that often, and I interview authors all the time. So I want to thank you for coming on. It has been an honor to speak with you and for you to give us this time. Please say hi to the girls, your daughters, and your lovely wife for allowing you to give me this time while you're home in beautiful Manhattan Beach. I appreciate it. And I hope we get together soon, too.
Me too. Deborah, thanks for having me. The honor was actually mine. I thank you very much. And thanks for the kind words and the plug about the book.
Gary Vitti, you are just a doll and a very generous man, a talented man, and humble. Please pick up the book, 32 Years of Titles and Tears from the Best Seat in the House. And I feel like today I got the best seat in the house. Thank you very much, Gary Vitti. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for Deborah Kobylt Live and Little Italy Podcast. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.